In his article that you had to read for this week, Story focuses on defining what popular culture is, and he grounds his definitions on developing the notion of culture as developed by Raymond Williams. So there's a video linked on this slide, and this video will illustrate the way that culture is constructed and how those ways combine into Williams' conception of culture as a whole way of life. In referring to culture as a whole way of life, Williams in 1965 identified three categories for the framing of the definition. His first frame was that of high culture. Think of it as the best that has been thought and written in the world to this point. This analysis of culture is essentially the discovery and description in both lives and works of those values which can be seen to compose a timeless order or to have permanent reference to the universal condition. On this slide, there's a link to the Metropolitan Museum of Art site, and I thought it would be nice for you to take a look at it, particularly given the fact that you're housebound for the next couple of weeks. This is one way of entertaining and enriching your lives. The next frame that Williams had in thinking about culture was recorded culture. I want you to think of this as the body of intellectual and imaginative work in which, in a detailed way, human thought and experience are variously recorded. So, in this analysis of culture, what we're looking at is the nature of thought and experience, the details of the language, the form and convention in which these are active and are described and valued. So types of recorded culture that you want to think about are places like the Holocaust Museum, or on this link, we have a link to the African American Museum in the United States. And, spend some time. Take a look at what a record of those cultures look like. It can only enrich you. The third frame that Williams had, and this is the frame that is most pertinent to the conversation that we're having today, is of mass culture. And mass culture is a description of a particular way of life which expresses certain meanings and values, not only in art and learning, but also in institutions and in ordinary behavior. This analysis of culture is the clarification of the meanings and values implicit and explicit in a particular way of life, but it will also include analysis of the elements in the way of life that to followers of other definitions are not culture at all. So in this frame, you want to think about things like the organization of production, the structure of family units, the structure of institutions which express or govern social relationships, and the characteristic forms through which members of society communicate. So the link on this page takes you to the film Exit Through the Gift Shop. You are required to watch the whole film. It's just about an hour and a half long, and there are further instructions to what you're going to do with this film on a slide coming. In summary then, popular culture is a site where the construction of everyday life may be examined. And let's stop and think for a moment. The point of this is not only academic. That is, it is not only an attempt to understand a process or a practice, it is also political. It is a means of examining the power relations that constitute this form of everyday life, and thus revealing the configurations of interest that its constructions serve. In 1974, on the note between high and popular culture, Raymond Williams wrote an article in the New Republic titled On High and Popular Culture. The article is linked on this slide. I want you to read it, and using the video linked on the mass culture slide, that is Banksy's Exit Through the Gift Shop, I want you to write a critical appreciation of no less than 200 words on the piece. So, remember, last week we spoke a lot about the culture industry, and we spoke about how the culture industry can be perceived as enlightenment as mass deception. The concept of this comes, as you know, and we noted last week, from Max Horkheimer and Theodore Adorno, who said that the culture industry is the business of the entertainment industry producing meaningless, mass-produced products that are aimed at deceiving the masses at several psychological levels and creating illusions and stereotypes. What they're doing is manufacturing desire for commodities that drive capitalism, and they're working with predetermined norms of the status quo. So just a quick refresher. When we think of the culture industry, Adorno and Horkheimer highlighted four major concepts: style over content, pseudo-individuality, passive consumerism, and advertising and the culture industry. So when we think about style over content, remember, repetition is everywhere. The only thing that is different about any competing products in a field is packaging. Buyers conform to the product offered. In other words, you're not fulfilling wants, you're not fulfilling needs, you're fulfilling wants. And most importantly, in capitalism, producers don't care who the buyers are. There's no personal relationship between Apple and you, but you may have a personal relationship with Apple. It is not reciprocated. Then there's pseudo individuality, talking about Apple, and as we discussed last week, the iPhone. The iPhone is maybe one of the most mass sought after items on the globe, and everyone thinks they must have this very new, very unique iPhone. But really, what in fact you're doing is conforming to the crowd. It's never just you. It's you and the millions of others who think that they are unique also. Then there's passive consumerism, where there's nothing left for the consumer to classify. The producer has done it all for him. In other words, if you want to buy a vacuum, you walk into the vacuum store and there are vacuums. There's no need for you to figure out if this vacuum is going to work for you because they're categorized for purpose, price, and technological capability. And the last point that we made last week was the notion of the relationship between advertising and the culture industry. Okay, advertising is a direct result of the culture industry, and there are complete and direct relations. Both are omnipresent. You can't escape from advertising. You see billboards everywhere you go. You can't escape from the culture, from the products of the culture industry. Both are repeated mechanical reproductions. Every pop song sounds like every other pop song. Pop songs move from place to place by reproduction. Both are viewed as manipulative, and both have as their objective the overpowering of the resistant or absent minded consumer. So, when you look at popular culture, what you're looking at is the critic trying to make sense of what is a proficient apparatus in the culture industry, moving and swaying the perceptions of a populace. In his essay on Gordon Roller, which you had to read for this week, Ramcharter makes the point that in Trinidad and Tobago, as we made our way into the world, becoming independent, the local media did the work of privileging the cultural contributions of the two major ethnic groups present in Trinidad and Tobago. And as a result, the population was exposed to a range of creolized cultural products that spoke to their heritage in the language of the new nation. Unfortunately, in spite of all its best efforts, and given Williams' stated concern that the Trinidad and Tobago society constructed as purely Afro-descended was delusional by fetishizing the Indian cultural expression through the broadcast of Bollywood movies on a Sunday afternoon and promoting variety shows open only to the East Indian population, the media helped construct a nation in which the one television station signed on with, "This is Trinidad and Tobago, home of steel band, calypso, and limbo," an indication of just how dislocated the concept of Trinidad's culture was in the years between independence and the turn of the 21st century. Using the work of Gordon Roller as a lens through which to critique the local culture industry, Ramcharita focuses on the fact that throughout the history of social critique in Trinidad, the fundamental power relationships of small elites manipulating oppressed masses has not changed. And he asks the question, does this mean that there has been no fundamental change in the ideas that have guided and shaped Trinidad? In answer to that question, and referring to the concepts around the culture industry, I want you to take a minute and spend some time thinking about our local culture industry and give me three examples of products that come out of that space. So, as an example, think about rhythms. There are artists who use the rhythm over and over and over. I want you to think about how that reflects on Trinidad's culture and what that means for us as a people. Give me three examples. So you have your research project, and this week I want to spend some time talking to you about how to create an interview protocol. Interviews for qualitative research, interviews are significant data gathering tools. And though some of you are not doing interviews as part of your research project, I thought it important that we go through what goes into developing interviews for this type of work. So here we are. This week, we're going to be paying attention to the development of a consent form. We're going to spend some time analyzing an interview protocol or the questions that you will ask in an interview. And then you will be tasked with developing your own interview questions that you will use when you go out into the field. Now, all of this material is available in the Topic 7 folder labeled Interviews. You need to download them to complete this week's tasks. It is important to note that no interview process for any type of academic work can take place without informed consent. In the folder, you will find a consent form, and what I want you to do is when you download it, change all the highlighted information with your particular personal information. Spend some time reading the form and, if necessary, adapt it to your use. When you go out into the field to conduct your interviews, you need to present your subject with this form, have them read it, have them ask you any questions that they may have, and only upon signature can you start your interview. So, in light of that, have you thought about who you plan to interview and why you're interviewing them? Have you contacted them? Where are you going to do the interview? What's the location? And how are you going to conduct the interview given the restrictions that we have? These are all considerations that you want to have when you're thinking about your interview, particularly given the fact that you may not be able to do the interview face to face, which is essentially best practice. Speaking about best practice, please click on the link above. There is a video attached here. It is interview best practices. In the video, you will see two types of interview. One, which is well done, and one which is not well done. I suggest that you pay particular attention to that which is well done because that is the model under which you will be doing your interview. So the next thing that you want to do is design an interview protocol or a questionnaire that makes sense in the context of your research. And interview questions are separated into three sections. The first section is going to be warm-up questions. You're not going to ask anything difficult or taxing. These are easy questions that make you comfortable with your interview subject and make your interview subject comfortable with you. Then your second section, this is where you're going to ask questions about your media engagement. These are going to make up the bulk of your interview and are typically the questions that you're really interested in. The questions are going to stem from and lead back to your research questions. Understand, your interview questions are not your research questions. Your interview questions are informed by your research questions and will get you back to the answer that you want for your research question. But in no way are they your research questions. So in other words, you're not going to go out and ask somebody if the paradigm of global media manipulation affects them. And the third section, or the final section, what we call the exit questions, are the demographics. This is where you answer their questions, you get feedback on their experience, and you ask them if they've got any questions, who they are, where they come from, as a means of understanding what informs the answers that they've given to you. So here are some guidelines and strategies for creating an interview protocol. As I said before, interview questions are not your research questions. Instead, what you're trying to do is get stories from people. Ask your participant about their experiences. Or if you don't want to ask them about stories, ask them to describe a certain scene. Ask them to describe their reactions, their emotions, etc. You're going to want to get relevant facts. So ask them about details. Then you're going to want to get opinions and preferences. This is qualitative research. The way that people feel is what is important in this type of research. Now, you don't want to be asking the same type of questions over and over. So spend some time thinking about how you can frame your questions. Think about things like role play. Ask your informant to imagine themselves in someone else's position. Use their responses to prompt another question. Position your participant as an expert. Ask them, in their opinion, what do they think about a particular situation? And then you want to present situations where they're not just being asked to think about the now, but ask them to think about the past, how the past will affect the present, or alternatively, ask them to think about the present and how it can affect the future. All right? So remember, ensure that your questions are open-ended, that they're straightforward, that they're not overly broad. Please don't ask any why questions. Don't frame your questions as judgmental, and try not to lead your informant to the answer they think that you want. Give them room to answer the question the way that they think the question should be answered. And remember, don't be afraid to ask follow-up questions. So if you ask someone, is the sky blue? And they say yes, you can then follow up with the question, why do you think so? Dependent on that answer, you can then ask, what makes you think like that? So remember, you're trying to build a conversation, you're trying to build a relationship. In summary then, the work that you have due by midnight on Wednesday is a 200-word reflection on The Exit Through the Gift Shop film in relation to the high and popular culture reading by Raymond Williams. You want to give me 3 examples of products of the local culture industry and validate your answers. And then you want to attach the sample interview protocol with your comments. Please compile all of these into one document and post to the appropriate assignment folder on the My eLearning site. And for those of you that don't have me on as your tutor on a Thursday morning, I need you to email them to your tutor so that they can have a record and they can be up to speed on the work that you're doing while we're in isolation. That's all I have for you this week. Remember, I'm online during our lecture period Wednesday between 5 and 7. I'm also online between 10 and 11 on Thursday to answer any questions you have. You can find me on Google Hangouts. You have my address. Take care, stay safe, see you next week.